Hello and good evening. Today we are going to talk about the commercial revolution. I'm very sure that you've already gone through the lectures and the write-ups, reading materials that I have sent you before, and you've already made a image or impression about what we mean by commercial revolution. Today's lecture is intended to clarify those points and also deepen your understanding and clarify any doubts or gaps in whatever learning you may have been having. So what is my first question is, before I start on commercial revolution, is for you to think about a situation that we are today in, that is the pandemic. Something that happened in one part of the world, in China, has taken over the world in a very massive manner, and we can see the impact of local occurrences at a global level. So this all has been possible because of the large-scale interaction, interdependence, and relations that nations have across the world. So where do we find the roots of this level of globalization and interdependence is to look into history. And when I talk about history, which period do we talk about as a period of globalization and interdependence? We cannot ascribe up to a particular period, because right from Indus Valley civilization, Indus civilization had rich trade relations with Mesopotamia. What has actually changed over time is the magnitude, is the scale of the interdependence that we have on each other or different parts of the nation, or the scale of interdependence that we have. And this has been because of the fact that we have been able to shrink time and space because of technology. Like we can reach across to people within seconds or maybe on a mouse click, or maybe on a finger tap. So the magnitude has changed, but it has always been a global world. So my question is, for you all to also think that how are we able to enjoy those things that a country is not producing on a large scale? For example, maybe cocoa, maybe olives, or maybe luxury goods. And where do these things come from? And I know your simple answer would be that yes, we are able to enjoy them because we are getting things easily from different parts of the world. Now, can we precisely call this as commercial revolution? Not really, because we have to see, or we have to look into the roots of how this actually all began. So first let me define commercial revolution briefly for you. It was a period of European economic expansion, say colonialism and mercantilism, which approximately lasted from say about 16th to 18th century. And this period of economic expansion, accompanied with colonialism and mercantilism, had profound impact on way things were exchanged, economies grew, and all that is covered, or all that is a part of what we understand as the commercial revolution. So what are its main aspects or features? So basically, commercial revolution is important because it is marked by an increase in commerce, banking, insurance, and investing. Why is it so important? It's a major turning point in Europe, you see, because it made the world, or European world predominantly, move from a feudal structure to a capitalist structure. Or we can also say that it ended the Middle Ages and it led to what we also know as, or called as, the modern age. It is also important because it brought in a new era of trade, and accompanied with trade was a lot of prosperity. And because of this, it holds such an important position. How did it begin? You must be thinking. Obviously, it began with trade. But why did this trade begin? The trade began because there was a demand, there was an urge, there was a desire for luxury items from the West, which it could procure from East, from Far East and other countries like the New World or the South Americas. So what were these luxury items? Like I said, silk, spices as in the past, and even the new items like tea, like porcelain. And the desire had always been there for spices, and it was always carried out through the Ottoman Empire. Now, how do we find a shift from what was already practiced, or the trade that was already going on, to what we see in the 15th century, and what are the causes? So, commercial revolution, like I said before, was unprecedented, you see, changes in the way economic activities were carried on. I said that it led to banking, it led to joint stock companies, insurance, and other things. So, what are the reasons? If you remember, we've been talking about crusades, right? And crusades were responsible for Renaissance. If you remember, crusades was an event which happened after the fall of Constantinople in 1453. If you can recall, when we were discussing Renaissance, we said that the Turks captured Constantine, and this led to the religious places of the Christians passing into the hands of the Arabs, and also a desire among them to win them back, regain them, led to wars, since these were religious wars fought between the Arabs and the Christian world for getting back their religious land. That is why it is referred to as crusade. So when crusades happened, the Christians were fighting the Turks, and when there was this fight going on, they came into the Europeans, the Christian world, came into contact with the Arab world, and this opened the eyes of the Europeans, because it led to new learning, which the Arabs had reached great heights as far as science, logic, and reasoning is concerned. And many of the people from after these religious wars fled from the Arab world and went back to Italy, went back to Europe, and carried so many books and carried so much of knowledge. And then they started questioning the institutions that were there in their own country. They started questioning the practices that were going on, particularly of the related to the religion, related to the church, the kind of predominance that the church exercised over the people, so much so that it decided almost the destiny of each and every person. So people started questioning the authenticity and the authority of the church. They started discussing discourses based on logic and reasoning. And because of this, there started a new temperament in the European world, which we can say that led to new birth, or which is Renaissance. And therefore now people were logically thinking, discussing, debating, experimenting, and it led to new inventions and discoveries. These inventions and discoveries and new learning, for example, the learning of compass, was accompanied by a lot of research and a lot of development in the field of navigation, in the field of seafaring. And therefore we see that, there were sturdier ships being designed, and compass, there was cartography or the map work, and people could now kind of exactly know which sea routes and how to reach from one corner of the world to the other corner of the world. And because the trade routes, like I said, with the fall of Constantinople, had fallen into the hands of Turks, and therefore trade from the land routes was no longer profitable. And when the Europeans were trading, they were trading for money. They wanted a lot of profits, which was not happening because the land routes were controlled by the Turks. And therefore, it was a passion, it was their necessity to devise or to come out or to explore or to discover new sea routes, new trade routes, and it was not possible to have them on the land, and therefore new sea routes which would enable interrupted kind of travel and to distant lands in order to get the items for trade and therefore earn a lot of profit. And therefore we see, there was a rise in so many shipping activities, and Magellan, for example, and Spain and Portugal became the hub centers, and they patronized people, and the kings started sponsoring the sea voyages, and all these led to new trade routes. Now, with this new knowledge of new trade routes and the rediscovery of silk, spices, tea, porcelain, which were in high demand in Europe, and there was an unprecedented rise in international trade. And when trade and European explorations increased, it also brought new food and new resources to Europe. So when new resources came in, there was a lot of prosperity. There was also a rise in population. If you look at the statistics, we can say that population had grown from almost 70 million in 1500 to 90 million in 1600. So almost 20 million people added in a short span of say 100 years. So it led to a lot of human resources available for work, and accompanied with this was also rise of nation states in the 15th century. Like I said, fall of feudalism led the people wanting strong kings who could safeguard the interest of the people, protect them from outside attack, and also protect the economic interest of the business community. And all these things led to strengthening of the powers of the king and rise of nations. With nations also came nationalism, that is the national glory, power, prestige, and other things. So the kings wanted a lot of glory, and which led on also money and also profits and also the luxury items that were available in the other parts of the world. And these kings started helping in promoting international trade, or in promoting those business-minded entrepreneurs who were ready or who were daring to take sea voyages. Now, when there was a need for more sea voyages and for power and for glory, it required a lot of money, and this money meant that you need to have more trade or more mercantilism. And if you want to have trade, then how do you get what you want at whatever price you want? You start controlling the people who are supplying them. So gradually it led to what we know as colonialism. So now let us try to understand what was mercantilism. Mercantilism, like I said, that European kings now, because rise of new nation states was taking place, and they wanted to increase their power, and they wanted to increase it through the system of mercantilism. Briefly, I can define mercantilism as an economic system used to unify and increase the power and monetary wealth of a country by strict government regulation of trade and foreign trading monopolies. So how do you understand it? That first, it's an economic system. What is the aim of this economic system? To increase the power and wealth or money of the country. How do you do it? You do it through regulating norms. Government tries to put in certain regulations. Regulations on what? How trade will be carried on between different nations. So how would trade be carried on? If all companies there is a lot of competition, many people are involved in trade, can we still have so much of profit? No. So that means there will be only some companies who will be given this right to trade. If there is only one company, or there are only limited enterprises that are given access to what they can trade and where they can trade, this system is known as monopoly. So Like I said, mercantilism's main aim was to make the country rich, strong, wealthy, and like I said, strength of the country is directly proportionate to the wealth of the country. And so mercantilists gave a lot of importance to money. And at that time, money was in the form of gold and silver. And gold, because it was the accepted form of wealth, it was useful, it was durable, it had almost the same value across nations or across places. So, mercantilism, what are the other aspects that we see as far as mercantilism is concerned? So, how do the countries become rich? One, the countries have a lot of gold or silver. How do they get this lot of gold and lot of silver? One, they can have their own deposits, or they can earn it through trade. How do they earn it through trade? If you're selling more goods, that is, if you're exporting more, and you're buying less or you're importing less. So exports have to be more than imports. So this form of exchange at that time was not possible because Europe was exporting less and importing more. So where does money come from? Money will also come from the profits that people earn selling at a very high price, what you are buying at other places at a lower price. And when merchants wanted to increase their income through, selling at a higher price and buying it at a lower price, there could be government norms which would stop them from doing so. So mercantilism's one more condition to be fulfilled was the expectation by the merchants from the governments, from the king, from the authorities, that they would remove any kind of trade barriers so that they can have profitable trade. And gradually we see, like East India Company or the Dutch East India Company that was established, English East India Company in 1600, which was established for this precise reason that they will trade in India and there will be a lot of profits, and therefore even the queen had a lot of share in the profits, and therefore a lot of wealth would come in. And gradually we have seen that how wanting to have more and more profits required wanting to control more and more regions, and wanting to control more and more regions was ultimately what resulted in colonialism, right? So mercantilism gradually leading to colonialism. I hope you've understood the meaning of mercantilism. Like I was saying, that what is the easiest way to ensure that you have the resources that you need? So, like I said, yes, you take over the land which has all those resources. How do you take over the land? Through political control. How? Through political control. You fight the people who are governing or who are exercising their authority over that region. For example, Bengal in India, the Battle of Plassey, Battle of Buxar that was fought. It started with, trade rights, and gradually Bengal was annexed. Later on it was the same in Carnatic. The Carnatic wars interfered in the internal affairs of the rulers and gradually acquired authority or control over that particular area. So we see that there were a series of wars between not only the local kings and the Europeans, whether it is the British, Dutch, but also amongst these European powers. For example, the British were fighting the French, the Dutch, the Portuguese were fighting the Dutch, the French amongst themselves in order to establish their supremacy or control over these colonies. And this is not only the situation in India, it was across the world, right? Now, the important question, where would the money come from for sponsoring the expensive sea voyages that the kings were able to do? There was something remarkable that happened at that time when in 1500, and that was the discovery of, shouldn't say discovery because it was always there, the South America was always there. The Europeans got to know about these rich civilizations like the Incas and the Mayas and the Spaniards and uh, the Portuguese, they started reaching this new world. And when they started reaching this new world, South America was very rich as far as precious metals like silver is concerned. So a lot of gold and a lot of silver was coming from Inca and Maya civilization into Europe. This money first reached Spain and from there to other parts of the world, and therefore a lot of capital was now available in Europe. So what was the impact, or what changes did this coming in of a lot of money from the new world to Europe brought about changes or developments? First, if you remember, till 15th century, we've been talking about that the center of economic activities was Italy, Venice, Florence, and other cities of Italy. Now that this economic activity started shifting, I said geographical exploration started shifting to Spain and Portugal, economic centers also shifted from Italy, Venice to, say, the Atlantic countries or the Atlantic ports. The nature of trade also changed. There was a change in economy, change in business methods, change in form of businesses. Let us see first the change in the center of economic activities. Like I said, that the geographical explorations, the Portuguese and the Dutch had taken the lead, and gradually, therefore, the center of trade shifted from Italy to western part of Europe or to the ports of Atlantic coast. Venice lost its importance, and Lisbon and Amsterdam started becoming more important. And the next that we see is that there is a change in the nature of trade. What was this change in the nature of trade? The products that were traded underwent a change. Old products were rediscovered, that is the spices and the silk, besides corn, wool, and slaves. New products like, if you remember, in India, indigo or porcelain or tea and coffee were also traded. So new commodities were now becoming important. How do we see a change in the economy? Due to new explorations in Asia, Africa, and America, we find that now European goods found markets in these areas. This again provided a lot of stimulus to the industries that were developing in Europe. As the markets expanded and the goods that were manufactured in large quantities could now easily be sold in these new areas. When this happened, the selling of goods in new markets, it also brought in a lot of prosperity, a lot of money, a lot of wealth into Europe. Therefore, it was very easy for them to invest money in new ventures. Capital is the backbone for establishing any industry. This capital was now readily available, and therefore we see that it led to rise of capitalism. So now we see that the economy is gradually transforming from a feudal to a capitalist economy. With the expansion of towns, what do we see? We see that the money economy was becoming all pervasive. In towns now, people were not resorting to the system of exchange that was prevalent before, and that is the barter system, but now they were resorting to new financial instruments. For example, we see that there is money being used, there is this bills of agreement, and what about the villages? This phenomena, we cannot say that initially the financial instruments took over in the villages also, and the economy transformed from a barter economy to the new money economy. But yes, we see that there is a gradual shift. Initially, there was coexistence of the barter system and the new financial systems. But gradually, we see that the new financial systems were overtaking even the barter system. Next, like I was talking about, the impact was change in business enterprises. what is the meaning of change in business enterprises? What were the people manufacturing or trading before, and what were they manufacturing or trading now? So earlier, basically, feudal economy, most of the people were producing their own food, but now new industries that were being set was sugar, the tobacco industry, and so we see that one of the impact of mercantilism, or the change as a result of mercantilism, was change in what business activities were also undertaken. Besides, mostly, or the most important aspect that gives commercial revolution its name is change in the business methods, because business had always been done in gold, silver, precious metals. But why do we call it commercial revolution is the way the businesses were done. So new financial instruments, like I was saying, banking, credit system, promissory notes, they were not completely new. Italy was already practicing it. Interesting thing that happened was a lot of Italians who were well versed and very experienced in these financial instruments. When Venice started losing its importance, these were the people who shifted to the Atlantic, to Amsterdam, that is Holland, and also to Spain and Portugal. And they were the ones who refined these systems. So we cannot say that they were new inventions and these new systems started. If you remember, in India, guild system were always there, the hundi system, and so much of trade was carried on even without moving a single gold coin here and there, from one place to the other. So these systems had always been prevalent in different parts of the world also, but they were now refined, became more sophisticated, became more pronounced, so to speak. We continue. So as Italy started losing out, like I said, the center of economic activity shifted to Atlantic coast, and at this time, with this new financial instruments coming in, we see the rise of banks. And so the first banks that were opened, also like I said, were opened by the emigrant population, and most of these early banks dealt only with coins and bullions, and much of the business centered around money changing and supplying of the foreign and domestic coins at the correct weight and purity. So after we talk about business methods, some more important things which was a challenge at that particular time was that international trade was growing, and therefore payments could not be unilateral. What do we mean when we say unilateral? We mean that money was not only to be given to one party, but there were so many different people at different stages to whom money or payment was to be made. That means that it was not unilateral from one person to the other, but it was multilateral. One person paying to the other paying to somebody else paying to somebody else. So since it was multilateral system of exchange and not confined to one particular place, there was definitely a need for devising some kind of financial instruments which could address to these requirements. And therefore, what we know as bills of exchange, promissory notes, provided for remittances of money. So settlement of accounts at distant places was enabled without shipping actual coins. How could they do this? It was possible, unlike present system where banks have branches and different branches or different banks have partnership with different other banks of the world. Unlike that, earlier how was it done? Today transactions happen online and also happen via these banks, like I'm saying. But how did it happen in the past? In the past, these wealthy businessmen, they had a lot of assets. They had a lot of centers around the trade routes, and therefore credit was granted either through an oral commitment, people believed in each other's words, and or through an international understanding or maybe a letter that of agreement that was written that so and so may be given so much of money, and at this time and this place, which served as, you see, a blank check. Promissory notes eventually formed the bank notes, and in due course of time, paper currency or agreement on paper comes into effect. So, for trade, carrying gold and silver was not required. So, by 17th century, these European English bankers started understanding that when they have a lot of money, people deposit this money for a considerable period of time and do not want it back soon. So they thought that when people are depositing this large amounts of money and they're not coming back in a short period of time to collect back their deposits, this money could be given to those people who need it, and some small charge or a fees can be charged on this providing of money to these people who they need, or the small charge can be called interest, and therefore the money market started. First bank that was established, like I said, was in England and Amsterdam, and earlier these banks were controlled and also owned and managed by individuals, private individuals, but later on they were owned publicly or by the governments, like the Bank of England. Like we were saying, come back to commercial revolution, and we were saying that there were a lot of people who wanted to trade and who wanted to earn a lot of money, and they were daring, but they did not have this initial investment, or they did not have this initial capital. They could not make this initial investment. They did not have this initial money to invest for carrying out a business which required a lot of cost. Many people started thinking of how to bring in like-minded people who are ready to part with whatever extra money that they have on promise of sharing profits whenever on. So a person or a group of people who wanted to start a business, they came together and they said that, all right, all those who want to be a part of this company can come and join, and they'll be paying an amount, and on the basis of whatever capital or whatever money they invest, they will get a share of profit that the company earns. And that is how what we know as the joint stock companies came in. So people started pooling in capital and holding the stock in the company as per the capital that they had invested, and this gave rise to the joint stock companies. Insurance companies also came up because when businesses are carried out, there is a lot of fear, apprehension, risk involved. There could be any kind of problem. Maybe the ship sinks, or maybe it is looted, because there were a lot of sea piracy going on. So to safeguard businesses, or to give some kind of assurance to the people who were running these businesses for safety and security of their businesses, it was thought that some kind of insurance as a protection for goods could be provided. And that is why we see that this joint stock companies came up. So we have seen that so far that how commercial revolution started, what are the various features of commercial revolution, and how did this commercial revolution pave way for mercantilism and also for colonialism. But we also need to understand in detail the impact of commercial revolution. So let us try to understand what exactly this commercial revolution led to. First and foremost, like we've been talking about, is a lot of money or investment started, a lot of markets were available, new industries started coming up, and therefore this commercial revolution was a fuel for industrial revolution. It also led to expansion in culture, art, music, literature, because people were traveling from one part of the country to the other, exchanging ideas, food was traveling, language was traveling, cultural practices were traveling, music was traveling, literature was traveling, and people were learning from each other. So it led to expansion in culture and trade boom, or there was a lot of money that the economy saw being created, and it led to stronger global economies at that particular time. New trade practices came in. Now, because of this rise of prosperity, we see a phenomena that we know as price revolution that happened as a direct result of this commercial revolution. What was this price revolution? Between 1450 to 1600, we see that the prices of goods in Western Europe rose almost by 500%. Now, 500% is something that was selling at rupees 100 is now selling at rupees 500. So, this unprecedented inflation or rise in prices of commodities in general is termed as price revolution. What were the causes of this price revolution? You will be able to now if you are able to examine how commercial revolution happened, you will also be able to come up with some certain causes that led to price revolution. You will understand that yes, there was a lot of prosperity, people had a lot of money, but the production of goods was not in proportion to the demand that people had for these goods. So when there is a rise in demand, but the supply is not able to meet that rise in demand, more demand, less supply pushes up the prices. So simple theory of demand and supply. So development of trade, coming in of large stocks of silver into the money supply. Lot of silver was coming from German mines also, and because of this, the prices were pushed up. People had a lot of money, want the items or the goods that were supplied were limited. Then there was a growing population. So again, growing population means more number of people who had to be fed, who had to be housed, who had to be clothed, and therefore it also ensured that the money kept circulating in the economy and demand for goods increased, and therefore the price revolution. Price revolution also happened because of urbanization. A lot of people were migrating from villages coming to cities and towns, and transport system was improving, and because of transport system improvement in transport system, goods were not confined at a particular place. They were demanded across the countries, and they were made available across the countries. So when goods are traveling, prices also scale up. So demand of goods from distant places also led to pushing up of the prices. Then we also see that the landlords were also responsible for pushing up the prices, because when trade was carried on, it was carried on through the routes that these landlords were still controlling, and they would charge a fees. So all landlords, you see, charging fees when goods were entering from their area of control to the other place, led to pushing up of the cost of that good that was traveling, and therefore when prices increased for the trader, he also increased it for the consumer, and that is how the prices increased. And you must also be aware that when there is a lot of money in circulation in the economy, prices of goods increase. And like I said, that there was a lot of coins that were increasing in the economy, and large number of people had a lot of access to money, therefore the prices increased. Large number of population blamed the increase in prices to the greed of the monopolists, and they said that they were genuinely and they were knowingly pushing up these prices. And because of inflation, naturally a class of people was becoming, who were the richer classes were becoming richer day by day, and the poorer people were becoming poorer. And therefore we also see that there is a lot of social tensions building up in the societies at that particular time. And when we see what was the impact of commercial revolution on agriculture, so like I said, that there was a large increase in population because of rise in prosperity. Increase in population definitely led to increase in demand for food, and when this large number of population had to be fed, um, the prices of wheat steadily rose, and uh, even the farmers were able to earn a decent livelihood or get back a good price for their produce. And in large parts of Germany and in Russia, we see that the feudal structures were still in place, feudal lords were still in control, and they owned large estates, and where people or farmers were forced to work, and these people or farmers were called the serfs, and this system was called the serfdom. This was continuing in Germany and also in Russia, and these serfs were supposed to supply labor, and they worked mostly as bonded laborers. So their situation was miserable, and areas like England, where enclosure movement started, and where the kings were taking care and were not allowing feudal structures to prevail, and taking care that the farmers' interests were taken into consideration, the condition of farmers was much better off. But the poor agricultural community kept on suffering. So, as far as in the European world is concerned, what did these landlords do when their control was shrinking? They had started opting for different kinds of professions or trade, or taking up a paid job, or even starting their own enterprises. And these peasants were protected by mm, the kings, and therefore the landlords were not able to exploit them. So earlier, you see, there were various ways in which even the English or the French landlords would exploit their farmers or the people who were living in the estate that they controlled. For example, they had to pay personal dues if there is a like special marriage, and inheritance taxes and tithi. And when the king started removing all these special privileges that were enjoyed by landlords, or these taxes, these exploitative taxes that were forcefully collected by the landlords, then the condition of these farmers in Europe started improving, but not in Germany, and not in entire Europe. Particularly in England started improving, but not in Germany and Russia, like I said before. So another impact of commercial revolution that can be seen is the rise in the number of workers that was required, because plantations increased demand for indigo, tea, coffee. All these were plantation sites, industries were coming up. We know in South America, there was a lot of plantations, and therefore slave trade or indentured servant trade, indentured laborers were also in India, particularly in plantation sites like in Assam. So their conditions started becoming miserable. We also see that Europeans entering the New World or the South America also brought destruction to the indigenous cultures and civilizations like the Incas and the Mayas. They were a beautiful civilization, highly developed, but they were very innocent, and they were not in know of the technology that was used by the European world, and they also did not understand the real nature of why the Spaniards were entering their world, and gradually they lost their lands to these European world, and we see a very unfortunate destruction of all indigenous cultures, particularly in Southern America. So we also see impact of commercial revolution as far as job opportunities are concerned for people, and therefore people started educating them, accountants and record keepers of banking and lawyers, and because there were complications when trade and business were carried out. So we see a lot new series of jobs that were required, and so more education. It started creating a class of working people without access to wealth, but who were responsible for adding value or creating wealth. We also see that there was social unrest in Western world, because population growth and food prices were rising and started affecting the poor, and there were a lot of wandering poor, and we see that moral failings and everything started at this time. So, what can we conclude when we talk about commercial revolution? We have tried to analyze the meaning of commercial revolution. We have talked about the causes responsible for it. We have seen what are the aspects of commercial revolution, and finally the impact of commercial revolution. Why this commercial revolution is important is because it is the basis, or it forms the backbone of industrial revolution. Industrial revolution which changed the way the world was to be. So in our next class we are going to talk about industrial revolution. So I hope you've been able to understand the meaning of commercial revolution and the various aspects related to it. If you have any doubts, you can talk to me on Schoology. Thank you so much.